As the brutal Vietnam War was raging amidst its suffocating jungles, an even more terrifying conflict was being waged underground. A select few were brave enough to venture into this horrific battlefield. In the damp darkness below the surface, while most men fought in rice paddies and tall elephant grass, the tunnel rats went looking for the enemy. This enemy, the Viet Cong guerrillas, moved like ghosts through hundreds of miles of claustrophobic tunnels that were crowded and booby-trapped. Only those who possessed steel nerves could venture into this hell. These were the tunnel rats, young soldiers who pushed into the unknown with just a flashlight and a gun. These young men slithered down dark passageways that were just a little bit wider than their shoulders, where an opponent, a trap, or worse, was often hidden around every corner. Compacted dirt was the Viet Cong's most effective weapon. It was both their shield and their sword. Vietnamese fighters started digging with great effectiveness against the French soldiers in the 1940s. They had constructed a more than 250-kilometer underground dominion by the time American troops arrived in the 1960s. Only 25 miles from Saigon, the Cu Chi tunnels developed into one of the most complex military tunnel systems on Earth. These stifling networks of dirt, wood, and concrete, often 3 stories deep, linked whole underground communities. As life went on below, death from the sky rained on their country above in the form of American bombs and Agent Orange. One veteran of the Viet Cong remarked, "The tunnels gave us the night, but the Americans owned the day." These tunnels weren't just any holes. They were more like subterranean cities complete with sleeping quarters, kitchens, and hospitals. For months, entire units resided in these tiny quarters, cooking only before sunrise, when the smoke would mix with the morning mist. These tunnels were used for concealment, mobility, and attack. After an attack, Viet Cong fighters may disappear by hiding under interlaced leaf mats or via secret passageways that looked like termite mounds. Since the enemy was under their feet, air reconnaissance for the Americans proved ineffective. Some of these passageways connected several areas and were almost 10 kilometers long. Precious oxygen was delivered below by small ventilation shafts that were camouflaged as anthills or hollow bamboo. Underwater access allowed fighters to infiltrate through riverbanks, and the Viet Cong cleverly excavated rooms at angles to stop grenades from rolling far. Chasing them VC into the tunnels was a grim business. The booby traps were terrifying. Unwary warriors were awaited by punji stakes, which were sharpened bamboo coated in excrement. Shotgun shells were triggered by tripwires. Venomous snakes and scorpions were occasionally positioned inside side chambers. Rooting the VC out of these tunnels was a near impossibility for American forces. What you couldn't see, you couldn't bomb. And to destroy them, someone would need to enter. Enter the tunnel rats. This was their nickname, but yet they were really just boys. These soldiers, barely out of high school, agreed to enter the sweltering, dark Viet Cong-infested tunnels, which the regular troops above saw as suicide missions. Men under 5 feet 6 inches with narrow shoulders, who could fit through openings just a little wider than a man's chest, were sought after by the army. They were unprepared for this nightmare. They were characterized by an unshakable bravery and a devotion to duty and to their comrades, ready to confront death in the dark by themselves. I was unsure if I would return. Decades later, Sergeant Robert Gallagher, his eyes still haunted, recalled, "It was like walking into a coffin, but you did it anyway." They had frightfully little gear, a .45 caliber pistol. Rifles were too bulky. They had a knife fastened to their chest. In the darkness, a flashlight illuminated the unknown. Additionally, a rope is always attached to one ankle in case they fail to survive, allowing their bodies to be hauled out. Once they entered that awful maze, they were completely alone, except for the enemy and their traps. No radio communication, no fallback. Only the sound of their own breathing and the eerie awareness that an enemy was waiting somewhere in the shadows. The goal of the fight at that time was to survive the next several feet. Politics and national identity was left on the surface. The world became irrelevant the instant a tunnel rat went into the small black opening. Then came the suffocating darkness, so complete that it devoured your flashlight beam like a ravenous animal. Then the oppressive heat struck, 110 degrees Fahrenheit, with so much humidity in the air that every breath felt like drowning. Then the smell hit you, a sickening concoction of rotting foliage, mold, human excrement, and even worse, the distinct copper smell of blood. There was nowhere to run to as your nostrils flared against it. They were only able to see a few inches ahead. Most thought their next breath would be their last. Yet, they crawled on. Water trickling from invisible sources, centipedes skittering across boots, and most dreadfully, the occasional faint whisper of Vietnamese voices that chilled their blood. These were the sounds that seemed to assault them from all sides. Private James Crockett never returned to the light of day. 3 days later, his team discovered him at the bottom of a secret pit, impaled on bamboo spikes. When Sergeant Michael Torres's weapon stuck in the mud, he had to kill a Viet Cong soldier with his bare hands in order to survive. The tunnels themselves were turned into weaponry. Men were buried alive in suffocating soil when some tunnels caved in by the retreating VC. Others suddenly narrowed unexpectedly, ensnaring soldiers who had crawled into a trap. The struggle in this deep hell became a primitive fight for survival, driven by the human animal's frantic want to survive, minute by deadly minute in the oppressive darkness. Ideology and politics was a mere afterthought. They needed instincts beyond military training to survive in this hellish underground. The tunnel rats created a desperate code of their own. To maintain night vision and reduce their visibility as targets, they wrapped red cloth over flashlights. They crawled painfully slowly, listening for the smallest sound of breathing or the metallic click of a weapon being prepared. Every movement was deliberate, as their muscles screamed for rest. They marked their way through the maze with obscure breadcrumbs, like a cigarette pack placed precisely right, or a bootlace tied to a root. Death awaited them with only one wrong turn. A thin lifeline waited above ground. For speedy escape, engineers expanded the entrances. Knowing that wounds acquired below were frequently fatal, medical professionals prepared tourniquets and plasma. Experts in explosives hovered close by, prepared to blast the tunnels in case things got out of hand. The psychological cost was just as terrible as the physical risks. A lot of people experienced catastrophic claustrophobia. For decades, their sleep was plagued by suffocating dreams. Those who made it through physically unscathed when their friends did not bore the terrible burden of wondering, why them? Why not me? Ron Jacks, an Australian soldier, never forgot the life-changing event. As he turned a corner, his spotlight revealed a Viet Cong combatant brandishing his rifle. It was Jacks who fired first. Milliseconds and fate determined he would live and his enemy would die. Years later, Jacks recounted, "I saw his eyes in that flash," in a shaky voice. "Even when I close mine, I still see them. In a hole in the ground, two men are attempting to kill one another. For what purpose? I'm still unable to respond to that question." Heroes' legends arose among these underground fighters, men whose bravery went against the grain of human nature. During his tour, Australian Corporal Clifford Long made more tunnel entries than any other soldier in his unit, more than 60. He once came across 3 Viet Cong combatants in the shadows of Cu Chai, using just his sidearm and a knife to kill 2 and capture the 3rd. When he talks about it, his hands still tremble. After crawling 400 meters down a booby-trapped tunnel to recover the body of a fallen comrade, Staff Sergeant Mike O'Donnell was awarded the Bronze Star. Years later, O'Donnell said, "I couldn't leave him down there in the dark while staring at someplace far away." No man deserves to be buried in that hell. First Class Private Randy Flood made it through 17 underground missions before being punctured by a punji stick in his thigh. He disarmed a tripwire device that would have killed the extraction squad despite being severely wounded and bleeding heavily. Darkness Below, his memoir, is still the most eerie description of tunnel warfare ever written. The medals, Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, and Purple Hearts were awarded to these warriors to recognize their superhuman efforts. "You didn't go in there thinking about medals," Flood laconically remarked. "You entered with the intention of surviving." The unwritten fraternity of those who had ventured into the darkness together and somehow made their way back to the light, forever were changed by what they did below. And this was what united these men, much more than patriotism or politics. These men took the tunnels with them when they went home. Decades later, they are assailed by nightmares, with sweat-soaked bed sheets, their bodies engaged in combat with unseen foes in the shadows of their bedrooms. There was no official acknowledgement for those who had fought with blade and pistol in the battles that took place underneath the war. The Department of Defense had no process of support for what these men had gone through. Society had moved on. Numerous individuals lost their soul to their own darkness. After clearing 17 tunnels close to the Cambodian border, Jack Wilson became lost in alcohol. Michael Ketcher was unable to tolerate enclosed areas. He experienced panic attacks that left him gasping for air in movie theaters, elevators, and basements. As America attempted to completely forget Vietnam, they waged their own war against the demons that haunted them, day after day, forever. It took decades for their stories to come to light. The basic implements they employed in their work are on display at the War Remnants Museum in Ho Chi Minh City today. The ropes that connected them to the outside world, the homemade flashlights, and the .45 caliber handguns. Eventually, books like The Tunnels of Cu Chi chronicled their terrifying experiences. Gray-haired warriors who formerly fought their way through the tightest and deadliest spaces on Earth come together at reunions and speak in a language that only they can comprehend. Many ambushes were avoided because of their intelligence. Because of their bravery, enemy strongholds that were inaccessible by airstrikes were destroyed. Their courage saved countless of their comrades. Outro, Remembering the Brave. These elderly warriors, grandfathers whose most heroic struggles have been virtually forgotten, walk among us today. Their legacy endures in faded photos and in museums where visitors admire miniature versions of these deadly tunnels without fully appreciating the horror the tunnel rats once faced. Instead of erecting imposing monuments in their honor, we remember them by reading their testimonies, appreciating their sacrifices, empathizing with their struggles, and never forgetting just how brave these extraordinary warriors were. Here at Hoplon History, we do not forget. If you like this sort of content and want to see more, please like and subscribe.